Redditors, what are your most interesting roommate stories? Story 1. My South Korean roommate in college played StarCraft 2? Not sure. Well into the night. We're talking like I'd be getting up to go to class and he'd be logging off. It cured my insomnia. Listening to a game in a language I didn't understand was very soothing, apparently, and I went from taking 3 to 4 hours a night to fall asleep, if I would at all, to falling asleep within 30 seconds of laying my head down. Story 2. My roommate in college claimed he was involved with the mafia. He was constantly sweaty, was very jumpy, and always had a lot of cash in his car. He never was around on the weekends, and I never saw him drink. Strangest of all is that he never once slept in his room. He was always on the couch by the door. He eventually told me that it was because if someone ever broke in looking for him, he wanted them to find him right away, so no one else would get hurt. I still don't know if he was telling the truth, but nonetheless, I always locked my bedroom door at night. Story 3. I'm pretty sure I used to live with a hobbit. Man about 5'1", curly brown hair, constantly cheerful demeanor, never wore shoes inside or out, literally slept on the floor in what can only be explained as a nest of blankets, started a garden and encouraged me to eat his tomatoes all the time, would bring home samosas and other goodies, always giving me half just because. He and his wife had a dream of living off the grid in a tiny home on a truck. I hope he's doing well. Story 4. I used to cook dinner and always made enough to offer to our roommate. He paid his bills and rent always, but sometimes he didn't have enough for food, so I would cook and say, "Hey man, want to have dinner with us?" He would usually say he didn't like whatever I was making. Fast forward to morning, all the leftovers were gone. His explanation? He must have been sleepwalking and ate it in his sleep. This happened 15 to 20 times over a year period, minimum. He would make these big song and dances about how what I was making was gross, so I would put up enough leftovers for two, my boyfriend and I, then go to bed. What was to be lunches for work, gone, and often dirty utensils in the sink. Fast forward another 5 years and he called me at 3 a.m. after not talking to me or my partner for 3 years, and told me my now husband, aforementioned BF, was doing crack in front of our 4-year-old. I called my husband, who was asleep. Neither of us had talked to him in years. What was this? Fast forward another 5 years, he's on death row for killing his roommate. His defense? He did it sleepwalking. Story 5. There are plenty, but one of my roommates used to sleepwalk and sleep talk almost every night, and I was the only one who'd be awake whenever it would happen. I'd witness her cleaning our fridge, sealing our open bag of chips, and I'd hear her quote Shakespeare in her sleep. What made her go back to bed was me asking her to sleep, and she'd look at me and close her eyes. Whenever I asked her if she recalled any of it, the answer was always no. My wife sleep talks really bad. When she was in an ER registrar, she tried checking me in multiple times in her sleep. I've woken up to questions like, why is the sleeping bunny in the corner? And how did that basket start floating? Many times. The best one, though, was when she sat up, grabbed a bottle of water off the end table, reached her arm out straight over the edge of the bed, and dumped the entire bottle directly into her purse. When I asked what the hell just happened, all she replied was, "Pesky ass purse fires," and then laid back down. Story 6. My roommate once created a whole new life form by leaving beans in the fridge until they molded so bad they became pure white. Then she got mad when I threw it away because she was going to use it later. Story 7. My freshman year college roommate was a random pairing. This kid partied all night and slept all day. Legit wouldn't wake up until 5 a.m. He goes MIA for like a week. I call my mom because I'm not sure he's even alive. She searches to see if he has been arrested. Before she can call me back, the cops are knocking at our door and ask, "Have you seen blank?" And I say no. Mom calls me back a few minutes later. He had been booked for robbery at a convenience store which was in our dorm building. He tried to hide in an air vent. He made the front page of the campus newspaper, was expelled, and I got the whole dorm to myself for the rest of the fall and spring semester. Story 8. I spent over a year falling asleep to the angry, muffled, whisper but not really arguments between my roommate and his girlfriend, just muffled enough that I couldn't understand what the problem was, but they were clearly not happy together. So I'd just lie in the bed wondering, what's my duty of care here? Like, they weren't violent with each other. And it wasn't like one person was terrorizing the other. It was just two young people in a consensual and mutual spiral of despair. Story 9. First college roommate rarely did laundry and would borrow my underwear, especially for dates, and return them dirty, unwashed. I told him in unequivocal terms to keep his hands off my junk, but he'd borrow whatever he needed anyway. Story 10. She was majorly depressed. She worked a lot for very little money, so she would mostly come home and lock herself in her room. At some point, she stopped cleaning or doing laundry. She worked at a childcare center and at some point contracted impetigo. Gross, but treatable. She wouldn't get it treated, however, because it was too expensive. So I lived in fear I would contract it, let alone the other kids she was watching. She told her work it was being treated and was no longer contagious, and they just believed her. She had these massive, crusty patches all over her face and just didn't care. After 5 whole weeks, she finally went to the doctor. Things were tense until her mom came to visit a few weeks later and convinced her to be committed. She had been sending suicidal messages to her mom every day for weeks. Her mom paid her rent for the next 3 months until the lease was up, and she moved back home. Never spoke again. Hope she's doing better. Story 11. We met when we showed up for dorm room assignments our freshman year of college. Almost 50 years later, we're still the closest of friends. I recently attended his daughter's wedding, a grand affair because he happens to be uber wealthy. At one point, I found myself choking up, and it wasn't for the bride and groom. It was for John and me. How far we've come from that first awkward handshake a half-century ago. Story 12. My college roommate didn't know how to do laundry before we started school. We had a community washer and dryer on our floor. Probably the 3rd week of school, I went down to get a soda from the machine, and I walk in and there are bubbles 4 inches deep on the floor. My roommate walks in behind me to check his laundry. He had put 3 full scoops of Tide in the washer with his load. I had to take him to an off-campus laundromat to wash all of the excess soap out of his clothes. Story 13. My first ever roommate, freshman year of college, was one of the most impressive people I had ever met. He had a great job that covered his cost of living and tuition. This was 2006. Had his own place, was getting great grades in a tough program, and was with an amazing woman. I was super stoked when he offered to let me rent the second room. Over the next year, I watched all that fall apart due to a sudden and overwhelming World of Warcraft addiction. I can still remember the time when I was trying to get him to log off because he was about to miss this long-standing fancy night out with his girlfriend. He looked at me with genuine remorse and said, "I can't." Story 14. I had a college roommate who was obsessed with CSI. She had a CSI pillow and sheets and blankets. She refused to turn on any lights and kept all blinds shut. She hated light and would sigh loudly if I would turn the lights on to do anything. I went to college right around when you needed a college email to make a Facebook, and she would tell me that Facebook is how they spy on you. She said she would never have a MySpace or anything of the like. She might have been right on that one. And she would always say I was a sheep and that I would have my identity stolen by them. My other roommate, we were 4 with 2 bedrooms and a common area, was extremely loud at all hours, and if you ever asked her to keep it down, even very politely, she would purposefully start doing cartwheels and banging on things and singing. She claimed to be Jay Leno's niece. One more, I had a roommate that slept with a new guy every weekend, and we could hear her loudly through the wall. We would tell her we heard her, and she vehemently denied every time that she slept with anyone. Come on, girl. Story 15. My last 2 roommates were a married man and his side chick. We lived in a shared house and the man recommended his girlfriend to the landlords after another roommate left. I had no say in it. His wife lived and worked in Germany while we live in the US, so he easily got away with it. They were cool with me, but it was very uncomfortable to watch, especially since I met his wife when she came to visit him, before I knew about the girlfriend. He was so much meaner to his wife, too. He'd complain about her cooking and make her cry, but with the girlfriend, he was Mr. Nice and Mr. Helpful. I don't know if the girlfriend knew he had a wife or not. Story 16. This is my only roommate story. After this, I swore never again. A childhood friend and her boyfriend. He was a chef, line cook at a chain restaurant, who would cook mediocre meals when the urge took him, which took damn near every pot and pan in the kitchen to make, and fucked off without cleaning up after himself. He also had a kitten really, who he never bought food for, so I had to feed it because I'm not a monster. She was an unemployed student, like me, who would use the cups from my dinner set as ashtrays and load up a single plate of food, take it to her room, eat from it throughout the day, and keep it. Rinse, repeat every day until we were out of plates. I said I'd clean them if she just brought them back to the kitchen, but nah, I'd have to wait until she was out and then go get them, complete with moldering food remnants. Eventually, my boyfriend joined our happy little household, and I started setting boundaries because it was no longer 2-to-1. That led to a blow-up screaming match and me and him moving out. My only regret is that I didn't take the cat. Story 17. I had a roommate for several years who was a decent guy. Quiet, cleaned up after himself, respectful. The poor guy's life was terrible. He dropped out of high school at age 17. Then he started selling weed, which he was arrested for by an undercover cop. Being uneducated, he ended up with a felony on his record, permanently. Throw on top of that, having a child and things not working out with his baby mama, so he owed child support. This guy was working as a dishwasher at restaurants for $10 an hour. Probably less. This was from 2010 to 2015 when we were roommates. He had no car, and the closest bus route to where we lived was a mile walk uphill from our apartment. He did this every day. One day, I was talking to my dad, who loves to ride bicycles and has many, if one could be offered to my friend. He put some new pedals on a road bike of his, that's all he had, and gave it to my friend. On the third day after he had been given the bike, I was awoken randomly to knocks on my bedroom door and some mumbled speech. I opened my door and there's my roommate, with his hand up to his face, covered in blood and maybe a tooth in there. He had placed his bag of clothes on the handlebar, and the drag from the front tire pulled the bag in and caused him to faceplant on concrete. I remember taking him to the hospital, and he asked me to look at his mouth. Good God. This has a happy ending, or something like it. After his injury, he had enough with walking to the bus, so he got a second job and began saving up to buy a car. For the first few weeks, though, this guy was walking to the bus and then working a 16-plus hour day. There was a gap between jobs where he couldn't rest much, so was probably getting 4 hours of sleep a night. He was saving funds, and due to his child support, he could only eat banquet $1 frozen dinners all day. That's all he had was one of those. He eventually got the car, and his quality of life got marginally better before he parted ways. He ended up moving in with family and closer to bus lines. Maybe not the most extraordinarily interesting story ever, but nonetheless, what that guy went through, I can't imagine. He used to tell me when he was walking home at night, he often contemplated stepping into oncoming traffic. Thankfully, he never did. After we both left the apartment and went our separate ways, we kept in touch. However, he frequently had phone issues when we lived together and had several different numbers in 5 years. I reached out to him to check in 5 years ago and never heard back. I hope he's okay. Story 18. First time I moved out, I was a sophomore in college. I had 2 other roommates I did not know. The first one was my own virtual doppelganger in every way. We were just millennial college partiers, a little shorter than most, and smoked a lot of weed. Our third roommate was from Ukraine. He was 6'7", was extremely athletic, and was into UFC. Every time we would have a party, every week, he would get rather ruthless. He would lose his shirt, he would pull out the Stolichnaya, and make my roommate drink ruthlessly until there was not much consciousness left of him. He used to choke us out for fun. He had a stairway beer bong he called the Alcohol Express Lane. He always had a bottle of Stolichnaya with him. The more drunk he got, the more Russian he would speak. We had the cops looking for him one time over a report of a neighbor's fence he demolished while drinking. He broke every plate in our house one night. He headbutted the fridge, made a dent in it, followed by blood pouring down his face. He had pet scorpions he would let crawl on his shirtless body. We called him the Ukraine train, or Turbo, and he called my roommate Half Speed and me Tumbleweed. He had a thing for large women. He laughed at his own blood. He only lasted 1 semester. After winter break, I never saw him again, and my other roommate transferred. Story 19. I own a house and rent out rooms in it. Right after I first got it, I was pretty strapped for cash and needed to rent out both of the rooms as quickly as possible, and unfortunately, it didn't align with the usual lease start dates in town. University and college, so January, May, and September are the usual. I had a lady come, mid-30s, wanted the furnished room. I felt it was a little off. Why does this grown woman have no furniture? My friends basically scolded me for being judgmental. Maybe she just got out of a bad relationship. Maybe she is new to the city, etc., etc. So I rented to her. Turns out she had just gotten out of jail for dealing meth. And honestly, she was better than the other one. She did her meth business in hotel rooms. She paid cash on time. She wasn't home a lot. One time, she left her little meth scale in the living room, and it inspired me to get a food scale, which was a game changer in my weight loss journey. A serving of spaghetti is pathetically small, and I had no idea until I weighed it. Ended up making up a lie to get her to leave when she brought a strung-out friend home in the middle of the night, because that's a little much for me. Meanwhile, the other looked good on paper. She was an early childhood educator on the supply list, except she was an alcoholic and heavy weed smoker. She never went to work because she never woke up in time. She never paid rent on time. She brought home a random group from the bar in the middle of the night on a Wednesday. She would take 3-hour-long baths in my only bathroom, and was just not my type of roommate. Finally kicked her out when she started stealing booze from me. I caught her, warned her. She did it again a few days later. I called her out on it again, gave her a month's notice to move out, and she had the nerve to ask for the rest of the booze. So, comparatively, the one was better. Sounds like the meth roommate understood not to shit where she eats. Doesn't want to piss off someone who knows about her meth business, so she makes sure to be a decent roommate. When my boyfriend worked night audit at a slightly questionable motel, he said the same thing about a couple of prostitutes who were regular guests. They were always polite and never wanted to cause trouble because they didn't want to lose a place to do business and didn't want the cops called on them. He would rather deal with prostitutes than parents in town for their kids' baseball tournament any day. Story 20. Freshman year of college, I was randomly assigned a roommate to share a tiny room, 11 feet by 15 feet, I think. I was a quiet comp-sci student from the San Francisco area who liked video games and D&D. My assigned roommate was a huge mechanical engineering major from the South who liked his lifted truck, dipped tobacco, and getting drunk as often as possible. Needless to say, the next 6 months were not fun. He left his spit cups everywhere, constantly played loud country music, and messed around with my stuff, including scratching a nasty slur into my office space-esque stapler. As the year went on, he seemed to get worse, probably due to finding a group of like-minded people in the dorms. Long story short, he was kicked out of the dorms about 2 weeks before the spring break. He and another guy went on a rampage through the dorm with airsoft guns, shooting the little whiteboard on everyone's door. For some reason, though, he was allowed to stay until the break. I stupidly left for home before he did, and when I got back, my very nice gaming PC was missing. I reported it missing, and told the police exactly where I thought it was, at his new place. They apparently searched it, and though they didn't find my computer, they found enough other stolen goods to get him expelled from school. Thankfully, my replacement roommate was a very nice, quiet guy, and the rest of the year went well.